Coming out of COVID, we had a really significant issue around residential tenancies cases that had built up considerably over that few years of time, where we had fewer members available and we had to change the way that we were running our hearings.
And as a result of that, the backlog, which was predominantly claims for bonds and compensation, they began to stockpile. At its worst, we got to just over 24,000 cases in the backlog, which is a significant number of matters.
The effects were felt really widely, I think. So every renter who was in that sort of situation often faced the situation that they had money that they couldn't access because they were not able to access bond money that they had put against the tenancy. And so in a lot of cases, they were unable to move confidently onto another tenancy. But similarly, there were rental providers who had a legitimate entitlement to compensation or to bond, who needed those funds in some ways to fund repairs, to even use for mortgage repayments and so on, who were not able to access that funding either. So it was creating a lot of difficulty for those users in particular. But within the organisation, it was also creating a lot of difficulties because a lot of additional demand was being placed on our staff to respond to requests for information and status updates. And in general, I think it just has a major kind of psychological impact, knowing that there's a whole lot of pent-up work that's not able to be resolved.
Because we had been, at that point, a totally paper-based organisation, we had to find new ways of working. We couldn't simply snap back to the old way of operating as a tribunal.
We all knew that something would need to be done at a sort of enterprise-wide level to manage the scale of the issue.
I started in VCAT in December of 2021, and that was really in response to the COVID pandemic. The tribunal had a fairly significant problem on their hands. It was really a bit of a perfect storm.
John came on board at the very start of the Backlog program as a project manager. He brought a set of skills to the table which I as a member did not have, and registry staff and admin staff within the tribunal did not have.
One of the things about this role was that it put John at the centre of a range of different internal and external stakeholders, and there was a need to bring together matrix level response to the need because we weren't historically structured to deploy operational solutions in an integrated way that would respond to this specific requirement. And so there was often a need to bring together disparate parts of the organisation, or possibly involving external stakeholders. And John was very good at working in that way of sort of becoming the nexus between those different areas, and would frequently proactively convene people he understood to be critical to delivery to coordinate their requirements.
One of the first things I did when I started was to take a look at the leadership that we needed to actually recover from the problem. So I was working with Warwick Mitchell and Lindsay Warren, and we put together a steering committee to determine what the future direction of the Backlog program was going to be. From there, we identified what sort of interventions that we required. And that was about saying, first of all, we know that there's a lot of aging cases in the backlog.
Circumstances of those cases, the fact that they had been waiting a long time, meant that in many cases parties were actually no longer requiring the services, or what they needed was something slightly different. So we needed to develop different responses there.
Ultimately, the Backlog program was divided into two tranches. So the first tranche was about arresting the growth of the backlog. We did that by determining what cases had been already resolved and which cases needed our attention. During the pandemic, our clearance rate of cases had plummeted to around about 55%. By the end of the first financial year, we had recovered our clearance rate to 99.4%, which was a massive increase. The second tranche came about when we had a change of leadership. That was under the leadership of Judge Edward Woodward and our new CEO, Fiona Chamberlain. Fiona was able to secure some additional funding to help support the backlog and had the ambitious objective of finalising the backlog within 12 months. Now, this is 25,000 cases, so it is a very ambitious objective. What we did for the second tranche was we implemented specialised case management. That was to take a look at both processes and technology, and then implement that, and then take a look at the resourcing required that would actually fulfil that. from both an administrative perspective and from a judicial perspective. So by doing that, we put a plan in place to resolve the backlog within 12 months.
The most significant outcome was the fact that we were able to say at the end of around about 12 months, which was the time frame in which we'd set ourselves for completion of the task, that we had dealt with effectively all of the cases that we'd identified as part of that original backlog.
Some of the cornerstones to success of the backlog program was making sure that we had the right leadership and governance in place in order to direct the program of work. Having had a background in governance and risk, especially in my healthcare background, we were able to put together the terms of reference for a steering committee that was actually going to be effective in making sure that it was going to succeed. The second thing that we did was to make sure that we had a defined strategy and that everybody was aware of that strategy. From that perspective, it was about working with the steering committee to determine what we were going to do and what interventions we were going to put in place, making sure that we documented that and implementing that. So that meant that everybody, both from a governance perspective as well as in the remainder of the organisation, understood what we were doing and that everybody was on board so that we're all singing from the same page.
We needed a strong structure for the program, at least at an initial stage, which in many ways was partly to articulate funding requirements to government stakeholders. John was crucial in bringing that program logic together in designing the specific responses that would be incorporated into a program, and also crucially in being able to model the impact of those changes. So one of the most powerful things that was built for the program was what we refer to as a burn down chart that was used to track progress. It's quite simple and easily understood. It's very powerful for communications, both internally and externally. It's a very powerful motivating vehicle within operating teams. And that burn down for this program was built based on modelling that John had engineered.
One of the challenges that the tribunal had was that with all of the members working from home and being a paper-intensive organisation, in order to hear the cases remotely, we actually had to start couriering files out to members to hear. Now that became unsustainable and we needed a better way to move those files. So I implemented a project that helped the tribunal to go paperless. Now that was in two phases. The first phase was about how we actually received evidence and then digitising that evidence so that it could be distributed to the members much more easily. The second part of going paperless was about how we actually track case files from start to end.
The tribunal is now predominantly electronic, so that of itself has assisted operations right across the board. And so all of those problems that we had at the start of the pandemic about inability to deal with paper-based files have now disappeared.
Another challenge that the tribunal had was that by moving to a remote hearing model, that we actually lost a lot of the efficiencies that we had compared to in-person hearings. So in order to improve this, we implemented what was called a bulk listings model that we could achieve via the Zoom and telephone hearings. What this consisted of was having a bench clerk to actually filter cases to members as they finished one case so that we didn't lose hearing time. So this ultimately increased our efficiencies via remote hearings, similar to what we had seen back in the in-person days.
John's contribution in many ways has a statewide impact. Like the scale of this problem was so significant that it needed a significant investment, but also the outcomes it produced would have that sort of broad-ranging social impact. And so I think being able to sit at that nexus of policy, operational, program, and analytical coordination would no doubt have kind of strengthened John's skill set, which he had already developed over his career up to the point that he started with us, and evidently brought all those skills.
There were a lot of eyes on the backlog program, and in order to provide confidence to stakeholders, we then provided reporting to various stakeholders. So we worked on a cadence of weekly and monthly reporting. On a week-by-week basis, I would provide reporting to the steering committee and the leadership to advise how we'd actually tracked for that week. And on a monthly basis, I would provide reporting to the Attorney General's office to make sure that we were actually on track with our plan. Warwick and I had a very collaborative relationship. We were able to have some very good and frank conversations about what was happening in the organisation, where we wanted to move, and how we were going to go about doing that.
I had a really terrific relationship with John. It was a really productive and rewarding partnership in many ways. In respect to this program, he was very central to the delivery of this program because he brought a lot of practical insight. It was possible to engage him at leadership level conversations because he could contribute so much to those discussions about direction based on his detailed understanding of the work. He's a very easy person to work with because he's just a naturally calm person, a naturally friendly and approachable person. And so that made life a lot easier for all of us. He's extremely hardworking in an area where often there are not colleagues around who have the same sorts of capabilities that you do. Unfortunately, it means that there's a lot resting on your shoulders, and John always rose to that. So he would often be producing a lot of the material that was necessary for us as a management team to be able to execute. And a lot of that load rested with John. So I was really very grateful to him, and I acknowledged that it was a program that could not have developed or effectively been implemented or achieved what it did without his involvement.
John and I didn't know each other before he arrived here. I'm a lawyer, he's a project manager. We come from completely different worlds, but on a personal level, I think the two of us worked very well together. We got on well together almost from day one. Very easy to work with, very much the team player. He came into his role here with no prior knowledge of the legal profession as a whole, let alone the courts and tribunal systems. He picked up how we had to operate and the legal parameters around which we have to operate. He picked all of that up very quickly and then was able to have real input into how we could manage this backlog. It was the documenting of what we were seeking to achieve, helping us understand steps involved in achieving those outcomes, being able to create projections as to where we wanted to be by certain points in time, and then being able to record accurately against those projections. Again, prior to the pandemic, as a tribunal, we didn't have those specific skills to be able to drill down into that level of detail. And it was that level of detail that helped us really understand what we were dealing with, how we were going to deal with it, and then mapping our performance against projections.
One of the things that I really appreciated in Lindsay is that he was able to explain to me the legal perspectives on case management and why we could or could not do something. We did come from two different worlds, but by collaborating together, we were able to come up with some excellent solutions that would meet both the judicial requirements and be empowered by both good process and technology.
It's very difficult sometimes as an outsider to understand what we do and why we do things the way we do them. But John picked up that knowledge and understanding very, very quickly. And so he was able to make a real positive impact on the backlog program and what we were trying to achieve. Based on what I observed, I think he could walk into any profession or industry and would very quickly be able to learn what that industry or that profession or organisation did and understand its processes, and then take an analytical approach to unpack processes and find ways of doing things better.
I have a bachelor's degree in information systems, which I graduated with distinction. From there, I moved into information systems auditing, where I gained an extremely detailed background in governance, risks and controls. However, one of the things that really stood out for me is that there's always issues with how we run projects. And there's a need to fill what's called the knowing doing gap. So that is with projects and programs, we know that they fail, we know why they fail, but they still fail. And so my objective is about filling that knowing doing gap. And so that's why I moved into project and program management. The first big program that I worked on was the Queensland Health Payroll Rectification Program. So that was following some of the issues that happened in Queensland Health Payroll back in 2010. Following that, I've also done quite a bit of work with clinical projects. So that included things within pharmacy and pathology before moving down to Victoria, where I've worked with planning and establishing the school dental program. Following that, I've moved to VCAT, where I changed industries into more of the judicial space, which was both a refreshing change, but it also allowed me to take a look at some of the synergies that happen between the health and judicial spaces. And by taking a look at cross-pollinating those two sectors, we're able to implement some really good solutions within VCAT. My big passion is about working in organisations that are purpose-based. A lot of my experience has been in government, and that's probably where a significant amount of my potential is going to be. However, I can also work across different industries and sectors. I really enjoy transforming for-purpose organisations to achieve maximal impact and to achieve their strategic objectives.